This is the Chip Franklin Show on KGO 810.
So we can use phrases like immigration policy, or we can be crude and say build the wall, or we can talk about technology, or we can talk about improving relations with Mexico, which is, people forget, has incredible natural resources and the ability to become a very, very, very important nation state in the Western Hemisphere. We could do all that, or we could act like the a-holes that we are right now, which is treating people along that border and people from Central America as freeloaders and criminals, instead of the bulwark of our economy, especially here in the Southwest. What happened along the border and that horrible accident is yet to be determined, but it seems pretty sure it had something to do with people that were here in the United States to do one thing, and that's to work. And this is the frightening part about that. Joining me right now is Michael Malone. He is the author of 25 books, including The Intel Trinity and Bill and Dave, and host of a multiple PBS series, and co-producer of a PBS series called The New Heroes, which was hosted by Robert Redford, and a contributor to New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, and has some really interesting thoughts on this. Michael, first of all, it was unbelievably tragic, and had this been 15 white people in suburban Chicago, it would have been a story that would have rocked the country. But instead, it had its we're not talking about it today like we should be. It is an unspeakable tragedy that this happened.
Yeah, horrifying. It when you think about it, you have an SUV where they've taken out all the seats except for essentially the driver's seat, and they've stacked people like cordwood in the back, and they run an intersection and they get killed, half of them, with two dozen people, by a gravel truck. I mean, this should never have happened in all sorts of ways.
It's interesting, too, because in the southern border back in the early 80s was open to cross back and forth for people who would be day workers. They would come over to work,
sure,
and they would go back. The idea that people would come into the United States and stay only happened when we shut the border. They couldn't go back and forth. They decided they'd rather be north and then send money home. And billions of dollars have been earned here and sent back, and some have been spent here as well. But they're getting work done that, it's a cliche, but that Americans don't want to do. And it's because, you can say what you want, but you're not going to get Skippy to go down there and spend 13 hours at a 45-degree angle picking strawberries, for minimum wage or less. It's not going to happen.
This year there's some problems, collecting fruit. That with the borders have been essentially shut down, not just because of border policy, but also because of COVID. And
right.
a lot of the farmers, in the Central Valley, California, for example, and Imperial Valley, they're having a little bit of trouble right now. And the fact that this the news carried it as if this crash occurred in San Diego. But, I mean, that area better than I do. I mean, you broadcast down there, didn't you, years ago?
I worked at KGO Radio, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was the Imperial Valley. This was 100 miles east of San Diego. And
almost to Arizona.
Almost to Arizona. And when I heard the news, I kind of figured that's where it was, because one of the phenomena we have right now is that because, you either don't have a wall or you have a wall, but you don't have an incomplete wall because that just funnels people through the gaps. And right now that gap is the desert. It's the Sonoran Desert. And so you're essentially taking people that used to come across at Tijuana, say, or Juarez, and now they're coming across and dying in the desert. So and
they do die. People.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a bad policy.
If you were to look on a map, if you were to look on a map and see a topographical map and see the dangers in there, everything from weather to heat to coyotes to crime, whatever. It's an incredibly dangerous route. Let me ask you a question, Michael. How did we get to this point? Was this purely xenophobic political posturing that made this border such a thing that Trump could carry it all the way to Washington?
To a degree. I mean, it's as you know, having been down there, I mean, a lot. This is an incredibly complex problem that we tend to reduce to simple, explanations. But essentially, San Diego, and let's take San Diego and Tijuana, which is what I'm writing. My book was about El Tercer Pais. I was talking about this third country being kind of created de facto between those two cities. Over the last 2 centuries, they've kind of been at odds until they finally got big enough. Tijuana grew big enough. It's actually slightly bigger than San Diego now, they think. They began to realize that they actually had a common destiny. They had the same weather. They were in the same valley. They shared the same main river. They had so much in common that they finally started giving up on hating each other and trying to get along. So ironically, even as the xenophobia about hordes of Mexicans coming across the border began to fill the news, at towns like San Diego and Tijuana, especially there, they were actually resolving a lot of these problems. They're beginning to work together. The number of people crossing back and forth across the border every day right there is a couple 100,000 people, and they have fast passes. I mean, I remember as a kid crossing the border in Tijuana, and it was hours in line in a car and everything else. But now if you have a fast pass, you barely even slow your car down crossing the border. And every day thousands of doctors go down from Chula Vista, go down to work in Tijuana because that's the medical tourism center of the world now. I mean, it's skyscrapers and advanced hospitals and all that. And kids come to Tijuana to go to school in San Diego. I mean, it's complicated. I mean, that's why it's so difficult to resolve this thing.
Your book is translated into English as called The Third Country. What do you mean by that? Is Mexico the third country, or is it the border?
It's the border. I
get it. Yeah.
Yeah. You go 10 miles either way on the border down there, and you're seeing a different kind of society emerge. It's a hybrid of American and Mexican culture. And it's really interesting because it violates most of the cliches that we've all grown up with. I mean, for example, Tijuanans go to San Diego, to the big outlet mall of the Americas right there on the border to shop because most goods are cheaper in America than Mexico. I mean, you wouldn't think that. Taylor Guitar, which is synonymous now with San Diego, they do all their
with Martin too. Yeah,
they do all their craft construction of guitars in San Diego. I mean, you think Mexico is where you go for crafts, but you go down to to Tijuana, and the big Maquiladora factory down there making Taylor guitars, they're the ones that have all the robotics and the automation and everything else. So I mean, because most Americans, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm reading a little bit from your book. I mean, Mexico produces more engineers each year than Germany or the United States, which has 3 times the population. Boeing makes plane interiors in Tijuana. Samsung televisions manufactured for us are built there. Toyota trucks and pacemakers are built in factories there, with all the AI, as you mentioned before, and all the other sophisticated technology. And this is funny, too, because I remember when Trump was bitching about this, only Trump would do this. I mean, we want Mexico to be strong and to be profitable because then they can buy our stuff. Why would we want to keep them down? It makes no sense whatsoever. Well, I'll make it even more complicated. You have the border wall, this ugly scar that stretches across the border right there. The people we have this vision that dates back to the 80s of remember the signs on the freeway, warning about the families running across. Well, I think most Americans think those signs are still there. They're in museums right now. Mm-hmm. That the people coming across the border now aren't coming from Mexico. They're coming from Central America. And the people in northern Mexico aren't too thrilled about it either. On the other hand, the Maquiladora factories, they say, God, we wish they'd stay here, all these El Salvadorans and everything else, because we need people to work in the factories. We'll give them jobs. We'll give them educations. We'll do all that. And meanwhile, you have people north of the border. Basically, everybody in the United States who has a pacemaker probably had it made in Mexico. And if you're driving a Toyota truck, it was probably made in Mexico, in Tijuana, or Mexicali, or along the border. I mean, everything is so much more complicated and interesting and, disturbing than we think. And we need to, before we do anything, we got to educate ourselves. I mean, if we're going to finish the wall. If we're going to tear it down and reopen the border, do that. But we need to understand what the situation on the ground is right now. I called it the third country because they're forging a new identity down there. I mean, San Diego has always felt alienated from Washington, D.C. because it's 3,000 miles away. What we don't realize is Tijuana feels even more alienated from Mexico City, which is, 1,000 miles away. They feel like they're forgotten and ignored and taken advantage of. So these border towns are forging a new kind of relationship that I think hopefully will give us a model on what to do now so we don't see any more tragedies like this.
Yeah, we're talking to Michael Malone, and his new book is, say it for me in Spanish, please, so I don't sell.
El Tercer Pais.
El Tercer Pais? Pais.
Yeah,
or the third country. Yeah. It's interesting, as I listen to you, I'm reminded of the Marshall Plan and how we took two countries that we fought a war with and turned them into economic powers that became some of our closest allies. God, wouldn't it make sense if we did that with Mexico? I mean, we could legalize drugs up here and kill the cartel and create enough money and have a huge surplus left over and still help people get off drugs that were hurting them. It'd be, of course, it would cost some jobs in law enforcement, but we could turn those jobs around. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but we just don't do it. And this is
we're at our greatest danger when Mexico is a failed state, and we're most secure when Mexico is healthy. And Mexico is, it's younger than us. I mean, it's a much older country than us, but in terms of population, there's a lot of energy down there. You look at even San Diego versus Tijuana. San Diego is a city of older people. Tijuana, everybody in Tijuana is under 30 years old. That's where the vitality is. That's where the energy is. And, if they still feel compelled to leave Mexico for economic reasons or because the cartels are dangerous or whatever, or corruption, and they come north, then it has all sorts of secondary consequences up here, like black unemployment will go through the roof. And, problems like that. So the best scenario is a healthy Mexico that's thriving, that people want to stay there and they're proud of being in their country. And we benefit because we'll have another Canada. I mean, one of the good things about this recent trade agreement is it ties all three countries together that could become the most powerful trading bloc in history. And that depends upon Mexico being healthy. And
who has the best opportunity to make this happen, Republicans or Democrats?
Oh, that's a real good question. At the moment, I think both sides have got it kind of wrong. I mean, the idea of just opening the borders wide open while the situation is as it currently is in Mexico and Central America would essentially wipe out the American underclass. I mean, there would be no hope of getting out of it. It would never be hard to find a job and anything else. But you put a wall up and you demonize the people on the other side. How does that help?
But that
just brings the anger level back up to where it was in 1900.
Can't we control the border with technology and manpower? I mean, isn't that possible?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, you absolutely can. And, the San Diego has shown that you can move the equivalent of a full-size Midwestern city back and forth across the border every day without, people staying on the other side or violating visas or anything else. it can be done, but it would take a bipartisan effort by Washington. It would take the implementation of a lot of technology, but of course it can be done. It just has to have the will. And as long as we either canonize, the people coming across the border, or we, victimize them and demonize them, as long as we're doing either one of those, we're not coming up with realistic, pragmatic solutions.
That's a great way to look at it. Michael, come back with us, please, again. Obviously, this is on the heels of this tragedy, and we'll get more information as we move forward. But, these are neighbors. It's not how you should be treating neighbors, and we have to figure out this thing because, I live in California. Where are you? What part of the country?
I'm in the South Bay. I'm in Sunnyvale, California.
Oh, you used to do stuff for ABC. You were the Silicon Insider guy, right?
Yeah. I've been listening.